Welcome back to the Japan Archives, everyone. Episode 92, getting close to the 100. I mean, I know we've done more than 100, but I know for you, Heather, it was a big thing of actually hitting the number 100.
Yes, it is.
So we're getting closer and closer. So we're going back to Shinto, and honestly, scrolling back to figure out, okay, the last time we did Shinto was episode 62.
It's been that long.
So exactly 30 episodes ago.
No. I could have sworn we did
Yeah, because I remember for a while we then wanted to do some emperors. Then we kept finding more interesting things. We did bonuses. We had several ABC episodes like the geisha. So we just never got back to Shinto because we're also getting very close to it matching up with the first emperor. So we're actually kind of close to finishing off the Shinto as it is. This one is, I think, I'm just doing the specific part which relates to the person called Ninigi. We'll get into who he is. It is a bit of a short time span for him, but then after that, it's like an entirely new chapter of the story. So I didn't think it made sense to put them together. Just keep this with anything relating to Ninigi. So we ended it off last time with Okuninushi going around the land with his friend Tsukunabiko, pacifying the land, killing all of the bad deities and the bad kami, all of that. Continuing on from there, actually in the Nihongi itself, we're now into the book 2, the second section of the book. It basically says that so Ninigi is the grandson of Amaterasu, the sun goddess. Now, if you want his full name, because we got some big names today, his full name was Amatsu Hikohoho Ninigi. But we're just going to call him Ninigi because I ain't saying that many times today. The boy was the child through the sun goddess's son, who does have a long name, which is Masaya Aketsu Akitsu Hayahi Amano O Shiho Mimi. Rolls off the tongue. And Ninigi was through him and his marriage to Taku Hatachi Hime, who was the daughter of Takami Mutsuhi, who was a kami that we mentioned a long time ago. I think he was one of the initial 3 kami that came into existence. So it's a very strong divine connection. Ninigi's grandfather on his mother's side, so Takami Mutsuhi, decides to hold a meeting up in heaven. He states that he wants to instate Ninigi as the ruler of Japan. However, first, they need to find a way to subdue all of the evil kami, as well as all of the herbs and trees that apparently can talk, which still live on Japan at the time. Thinking about this, it's kind of interesting because the previous episode, even though it was a long time ago, the whole deal of Okuninushi was to pacify the land. So it's said that he did do that, but obviously now they're saying he obviously didn't because the bad kami are still around. So a bit of a, usual mythological contradictions coming in here already. However, the kami known as Ame no Hohi is chosen, and he is sent down to Japan to pacify. So 3 years go by. 3 years go by, there's no word from this dude, Ame no Hohi, basically because he decides to gain the favor of Okuninushi, who's already ruling over Japan, and so they just don't do anything. He's just happily staying down in Japan, living his life. They have a meeting again and decide to send Ame no Hohi's son, Oho Seihi. However, he wishes to follow in his father's footsteps, makes no report back up to heaven, and just stays on Japan, living his life, carefree, doing whatever he wants. And so they have another meeting, another heavenly meeting, and so Takami Mutsuhi again is like, we need to send someone else down. Nothing's happening. What are we going to do? We need to send someone down to subdue Japan. So this time, another kami is chosen by the name of Ame Wakahiko. He is gifted a deer bow and arrows before he leaves to take down with him to help in his subjugation of Japan. This dude, again, this kami decides not to do any of that. He goes down to Japan, decides to get married. He marries someone called Shitateru Hime, and they remain in Japan together, living out their lives. No report, again, is made up to heaven, And so Takami Musuhi decides to send a friend of his, a little pheasant from heaven called Nanaki. He sends down the pheasant to kind of go down, see what's happening, and get a report on what's happening. Why he didn't just go himself, Heather, I don't know. Ame Wakahiko, he sees the pheasant happily sitting in a tree watching what's happening, so he decides to shoot the pheasant. It doesn't state whether he realized it was a pheasant from heaven or if he just thought it was a pheasant that he could hunt. However, he shoots the pheasant and the arrow flies straight through the chest of the poor bird, going all the way up to heaven, landing at the feet of Takami Musuhi. Now this guy looks down, sees the arrow, sees that there's blood on the arrow, and he takes this as evidence that Ame Wakahiko is down there fighting the good fight, killing all the bad kami, just like he was tasked to do so. However, in his infinite wisdom, Takami Musuhi picks up the arrow. I'm trying not to laugh because this is so silly. He decides to pick up the arrow and throw it back down to Earth, throw it back down to Japan as a, I got your message, good job. However, it hits Ame Wakahiko, killing him instantly. Because he was laying down at the time. So it just hits him, and so he's dead. Instantly dead. So the dude who he sent down to pacify Japan, he accidentally kills. And the laments of this Kami's wife reach all the way up to heaven, and then they realize he's dead. So they take his body and place it into a mortuary house up in heaven. The mortuary house, however, doesn't last very long. His friend at the time was someone called Ajisukita Kahikone. So he decides to go up to heaven, because apparently it's quite easy to just come and go from heaven at this point. So I'm still not sure why Takami Musuhi didn't just go down himself to check what was happening. However, his friend goes to visit heaven to give his condolences to his friends and family up there who died, his friend that died. However, it is said that they look very alike, almost twins in fact. So everyone mistakes him for his dead friend. And everyone's saying like, oh, you've come back to life, we're so happy. So he gets angry, saying like, I am not this person. We might look the same, but please don't insult me by calling me by my dead friend's name. And he gets so angry, he takes up his sword and just destroys his friend's grave, as you do. And the mortuary house then falls down from heaven to Japan and forms the mountain called Moyama. And as I say, third time is the charm, but now that I've read this to you, I've realized it's actually the fourth time that Takami Musuhi then decides, let's just have another meeting. I'm sure I can send someone else instead. He still doesn't want to go himself for some reason. So he calls another meeting, and this time, Futsunushi is decided as the person who will go down to Japan and figure out what's going on, subdue the land. It's said that another kami comes forth, Takemikazuchi, who we mentioned a very, very long time ago. I think he is one of the sons of the fire kami, Kagutsuchi. Perhaps. He comes forth from his home, which apparently was the rock cave Amaterasu was hiding in all those many episodes ago. So apparently he lives there. He comes forward and he says that he also wants to accompany Futsunushi. So the two of them will go together. It wasn't as polite as I make out. He kind of comes forth saying like, why am I not worthy? Why is no one asking me? One of those type deals. So they decide, well, you can both go together. Please calm down. Head on down to Japan. Pacify the land together. Once they get there, the two of them approach Okuninuchi, telling him that one of the powerful kami up in heaven, Takami Musuhi, he wants to send down his grandson to rule over Japan. Are you willing to allow this to happen? Like, are you going to give up your ownership of the land and let this dude you've never met rule it instead? Okuninushi's reply was that, well, I can't just say yes. I got to ask my son first, Kotoshiro Nushi. But right now he's away hunting birds, so I'll go send a messenger. Please wait. The son finally gets the message, comes back and says, my father should do this. The kami from heaven are asking it to be done, so let's do it. I'm willing for it to happen. I consent. And then it says that after this, Kotoshiro Nushi withdraws from the world, which is a polite way of saying he just dies. So instead of just continuing living in Japan, or even just returning to heaven. He's just like, okay, my dad can have Japan. I'll just go die for some weird reason. Such a weird turn of events. And of course, his father decides to follow. He gives the spear to the 2 kami that came. He's like, this is the spear I used to subdue the land. Please give it to Ninigi. It will ensure he is also very successful. And with that, Okuninushi also withdraws. He just decides to go to Yomi. He just decides to go to the afterlife. He doesn't want to continue living for some reason anymore. So him and his son are like, okay, someone else can rule Japan. We'll just go and die. This is very bizarre when you say it out loud. After that, Futsunuchi and Takemikazuchi go around. They subdue all Japan, ready for the arrival of the grandson of the sun goddess, Amaterasu. Now, of course, there's many alternative writings. When you read the Nihongi, you have a whole paragraph, and then there'll be like 10 more, which says, in an alternate writing, it says this. In an alternate. There was about 20 or 30 alternative versions to this. All slightly different, all with slightly different gods, always slightly different events. But I picked one of them, at least for this, because I thought it was really interesting. One alternative writing in the Nihongi states that when they went around and subdued Japan, there was one kami that refused to submit. And this kami is interesting because it is the only kami of this type mentioned in all of Japanese mythology, and that is a kami of the stars.
Oh.
Kagese-o. The only star kami mentioned in all of Japanese mythology. And so it said that a different kami called Takehazuchi comes down to subdue the star kami. It's not really explained why he's needed to do this, whether they had some kind of relationship or connection to the star kami. However, he comes, subdues this star kami. But I just thought that was an interesting little extra tidbit. But it also makes sense in a way. Japan is very much focused on the sun goddess. Even her brother isn't very mentioned that much, the moon kami. We don't hear much about him, really, if I think about it. So it also makes sense that the stars don't have much of a role as well in the mythologies of Japan. So once this is all done, Japan has been subdued again, apparently, even though Okuninushi is said to have also done it. They return up to heaven to make their report, and Ninigi is said to have descended down to Japan, arriving at the peak of Takachiho, which is a mountain in Kyushu. And that's where that's also where Jimmu also starts his pilgrimage all the way through Japan as well, and eventually making his way to the Yamato area. Another alternative writing here, which is worth mentioning, like I said, there's many, because the actual main story, I think it's interesting sometimes that, at least for me, when I've read this, you learn about a lot of the main stories of Japanese history, and it's told like, this is the story of what happens. And they're told you like, oh, the sacred treasures are this, or Amaterasu is the child of these people. But when you actually read the main story, most of that is only actually in the alternative writings, but has been taken to be then taught as the main story in like the schools or by scholars or in the temples you go to. So it's very interesting that a lot of the alternative stuff positioned as the main event. The main story that is often told is that when Ninigi descends to Earth, he comes with an entourage of gods and that he's given the sacred treasures. However, that's an alternative version of the story in the Nihongi. So the alternative writing says that Ninigi wasn't even the one that was going to be chosen. Amaterasu wanted her son to go instead. However, during the time when Japan was being pacified, Ninigi was born, and Amaterasu's son said, I don't want to go, can my child go instead? Which is why the grandson was actually chosen. And when he is sent down, he is given the sacred treasures, the sword, the jewel, and the mirror. And when he's sent down, he's sent with an entourage of 5 different kami: Ame no Koyane, Ame no Futodama, Ame no Uzume, Ishikoridome, and Tamaya. We've mentioned them all before. One of them was the one that created the jewel. One of them created the mirror. The other 3 helped a lot in getting Amaterasu out of the sun cave. But like I said, it's interesting that all of those things that are taught as the main event are actually not in the main story. They were added in, in modern day context as part of the canon myth, I suppose you could say. A little confusingly here as well with these myths, the Nihongi then says that after he arrived in Kyushu, it then says Ninigi went to the floating bridge of heaven, which doesn't make sense geographically, like he's already left heaven. However, he went to the floating bridge of heaven, and here the Nihongi actually gives us a location for this bridge, whereas before we've only been told it's up in heaven. Apparently, the bridge spans from 2 different summits of a mountain called Kusubi, again on Kyushu. So it's a bridge that goes from one peak to another. So he goes to Kyushu, then some reason goes back to the Bridge of Heaven, and then starts his exploration of Kyushu, and eventually he comes across a woman called Konohana no Sakuya Hime, and this becomes his wife. She was the daughter of a kami known as Oyama Tsumi, who we have mentioned before. I forget why, but he has been in the stories before. And Ninigi decides to favor her, eventually making her his wife and his love. And their first night together, she actually becomes pregnant very, very quickly. As it's only been one night, Ninigi is unable to believe that the child is his. It's only been one night, even though we're in the realm of gods and kami at this point. However, Konohana no Sakuya Hime, she says, but it is your child. You have to believe me. And so she decides to construct a doorless house, which she then goes to live in. In this doorless house, she then declares, I'm going to burn this house down. Now, bearing in mind, as an aside, this woman is potentially, because we have mentioned her potentially, she is thought as maybe the kami of Mount Fuji. So she has associations with fire and also potentially being a dragon of sorts. So she's immune to fire. So she says, I'm going to burn this house down. If these are truly your children, this fire is not going to affect them. They will live. If these children are not yours, they're going to die in the fire. So he goes, okay. She sets fire. She gives birth from the ashes. 3 children survive. One was called Honosusori, one was called Hikohoho Demi, and finally the last one was called Hono Akari. So they all survive. The emperor, no, not the emperor, sorry, he's not the emperor. Ninigi then says, okay, these are my children. I'm sorry I doubted you. And then it said that, weirdly enough, after a long time, Ninigi finally passes away and was buried in his Misasagi in Hyuga, on the island of Kyushu. So that is the story of Ninigi's descent to how it happened, his descent to Japan, and the meeting of his wife and his 3 children. And of course, one of those children is going to be the grandfather of Emperor Jimmu at some point. I saw you furiously writing names and notes as I was speaking. There was a lot of names there. I'm so sorry.
I have a whole page here. And eventually I just gave up. There were so many names today. The most I can remember is the story of the pheasant who came down, got shot, arrow went back up, and the arrow went back down and killed Ame no Hohi. I think I wrote the name down as. I got parts of some of the names. Some of the names are very creative. I wrote down. The pheasant was Nanaki. I got that one.
The pheasant was Nanaki.
I even drew a picture of the pheasant. I went, this would have been great as a comic or something where we could actually have a visual representation of everyone. I also have talking herbs written down because I found that was fascinating. Just, talking herbs like you do. And everyone keeps going down to Japan and not coming back up. And Takage Musuhi, I think his name. Just
Takamusuhi. Takami Musuhi.
Sending people down, like, why aren't you not checking? You just, I forgot, I sent them down. Anything going on there? No? Okay, let's try again. Has such an interesting story through all the names. I don't remember. I tried to write them down. But I could not.
That's fair enough. But you of course did some preliminary reading before.
I did a very quick skim and saw all the names and went, yep, lots of names. And I saw something about giving birth. So some of the very, very, very basics, but not the several meetings and the talking herbs and pheasants. I had an interesting story, to be perfectly honest. Like, through all, like, that's, I wish I had more commentary about this one, but
I think often with the Shinto ones, we don't have that much to say because it's like, there was a lot of story, a lot of names, a lot of absurdity. Because of course what I'm making notes from is a very like more streamlined version. Like I'm cutting out all these alternative versions unless I think they're interesting or add to it, like the ones I kept. Even because I'm rewriting them in more modern English, it just the strangeness and absurdity comes across more when we start reading it in more of a modern context. Like when I read it at first, I was like, oh yeah, he just had another meeting and found someone else suitable. And then reading with Dion, like, why didn't he just go himself? People seem to just come and go from heaven quite easily. Why didn't he just go and
Send
do
a
it himself?
messenger that's not a bird
Yeah,
with a guy that has a bow and arrow. Like,
exactly.
why did you send a bird? Like, do you not have other messengers? This poor bird.
And also, why didn't he send the bird after the first time?
Questions, many questions.
Many questions. But I mean, it's nice to have come back to this. It's all coming back into my head now. I'm excited to see what happens next. I do believe the next section relates to at least two of his sons. I think one of them isn't mentioned actually that much in the narratives. He's kind of just said like, oh, he was the ancestor of these certain people. And then the other two brothers that have more of a story and a connection. So it'll be interesting to see what that is next time. I also think this particular next story is often included a lot in the fairy tale books of Japan.
Oh, cool.
Like the books I've used before by Yae Theodora Ozaki. This is also in her book, written more as a fairy tale, like taken from the Nihongi or Kojiki. So it's interesting that some stories from this are also seen as a fairy tale, but for some reason, like the thing we read today is not classed as it. So interesting to see. Like the classification of fairy tales or not is a very, very gray area, I feel.
I mean, we had elements of, was it farce is the right word in this one?
Yeah.
So maybe that's why for this one it's not fairy tale.
Very true. But that is our episode for today. Thank you everyone for tuning in. Next section of the Shinto mythologies is done as we get closer to matching up with Emperor Jimmu. Thank you so much for tuning in today. That's everything from me. How about you, Heather?
That's all from me.
All right. Well, we will see you again in 2 weeks, guys. Mata ne.
Mata ne.